we had two parts of the presentation. One was about economics, companies, and the other was about science that is doing the big data thing. I was, of course, fascinated by both of your presentations. I had quite a number of questions. One is about success, and the other is about bias, because my name contains biases. So, success is about the others, us, the collective judgment, not the individual judgment. Your first successful paper was in '98. '98, as you all remember, was the starting of the bubble, the internet bubble. I don't have big data to suggest that that was related. Do you?
That may be a correlation, but not causation, right? That's where the difference is. But if your middle name is Bias, let's talk about that. And that's exactly the problem, actually, with the success story and the performance leads to success story. Because one of the things we see, and I discuss a lot in the in Il Formula, right, is the fact that in many areas where we employ experts to judge performance, they're often unable to do so. And when they're unable to do so, they're unable to recognize that they cannot really see performance, and then they act on biases. So, and acting on biases has multiple forms and hurts minorities and hurts women and hurts many different things. For example, my best example that I could write, there are several good examples, but one of them is that was well documented is the Queen Elizabeth music competition, since that for the 1930s till today is actually awarding, it's kind of, creates the stars in both piano and violin, as well as in composition and so on. And it's a very well-designed competition so that really the judges could truly figure out who is the best musician. But when we other actual economists have analyzed the data, it turned out that the way the competition is done, at about 100 people start and then 12 finalists are left. Every 2 finalists every day for 6 days are competing. One first, the other one second. Everybody gets they all play the same score, and everybody gets exactly 1 week before their performance, so they have the same time. And the judges must decide on the spot the grade. They cannot change their mind. So it's perfectly done for the best performer to win. Yet, no one has ever won on day 1. Always, only one person won on day 2. Most winners come from the last days. And when you crack the numbers, it turns out that if you are on the last days, you're typically 2 spots ahead on average compared to the first days. If you are a man, you are a step ahead compared to women. And if you are even the second one on the same day, you are a step ahead in the final ranking than those actually who are the first. So what happens in that case? Those 12 finalists, let's say in piano, are utterly indistinguishable regarding their ability to play piano. They were chosen from the 100 best pianists all over the world. So what the judges do is that they act based on kind of biases and instinct. There is a memory bias. We tend to remember always the latest one that we saw. There is a learning bias. First day, I'm not familiar with the piece. I'm still learning the piece as a judge, and only by the second and third day I can actually pay attention how you're playing versus simply then you play, and the gender bias and so on. So, and there's lots of examples all around the world where people started to try to carefully piece apart, and what we see is that in most areas we're unable to measure performance and we replace with these instinctual biases. We need to really at least acknowledge these biases as a first step towards eliminating them.
We want to eliminate them.
I do.
Okay. Well, no, that's important because also when Julia said that if we do 10,000 hours of training, we can become good at any activity. And you mentioned Queen Elizabeth. And if I do 10,000 hours of training to be Queen Elizabeth, I cannot be Queen Elizabeth, then there is something that our biases are useful about. But in any case, it's fascinating, and thank you. About the black box research, you just mentioned at the end some kind of approach that you're looking at. Where are we at the moment? What do you say? Would you say that we are starting this research, or we already have some kind of results?
That's a good question. Certainly, there are aspects of the GDPR that we are much more forward with respect to this one. In all the discussion concerning privacy by design and the aspects related to the treatment of privacy, preserving, data mining, machine learning, that can already count on solutions that are quite stable. Technologies are there that can be used in most of the cases, that can be handled. So from that part of the regulation, I think it can really be implemented now. The right to explanation is a challenge for the future. So we are now, in my opinion, at least 4 or 5 years until we can actually have large-scale deployed solution for these problems. So there are many examples, also practical ones, but they're not at the level of a standard methodology that can be readily applied. So it's a challenge for research and science, even because, you know, what actually is an explanation is not easy to, right? What's an explanation for you can be not an explanation for me, or the other way around. So it's also a matter of you know, the right cognitive metaphor to deliver to different skill sets, to different expectations of people. May I also say one little thing about bias? Yeah. Very, very quick. Also because we need to find something to disagree on, right? I believe that there are aspects, judicial decision is one example, where bias can be said very positive and important. One example is somehow measuring a technical performance. There should be more, let's say, objective than it is typically today. One aspect is to judge about, for instance, liberty and options of people. Of course, you would like that people in the same situation are treated in the same way, right? But you never really know how to define the situation in a way that you consider all the possible variables, right? You know, especially talking about persons, you can never say, okay, this set of 200 variables completely cover all possible nuances of the life of a person. So in that point of view, when I say people in the same situation should be treated equally, it's very fair, but we have to be very careful of what are the observations of on this person. And so the bias is important.
Yeah. You said that we should agree on what is an explanation. We should also agree on what it is a bias then.
Well, I mean, I think nevertheless, I mean, there could be judgment made after the fact whether that bias is acceptable. But we should be fighting as much as possible to root out biases, because biases have huge consequences on the society and the economy. You know, most countries leave half of their workforce locked down. They're called women, right? And they're not giving them opportunities because there are inherent biases the way we operate, right? The same with minorities. We keep locked up very, very well-intentioned and healthy people in jails in America just because they're black, right? And so there is so much damage done to the society, to the barriers, that I think we should do everything in power to unlock it. And once we unlock and understood the consequence of biases, then it's truly a societal decision whether we want to go after and how we're going to do that. But I think staying blind to it is the worst thing we can do. And I'm sure we agree on that.
I totally agree. What I mean is that you may have positive bias, like favoritism for women and blacks, which is also a form of bias that we accept as positive.
Positive, the Biase, it's okay. You know.
That's more like an action to stop the virus, right?
No, I would like to go ahead. I once, just one more thing. I once interviewed Chris Anderson, not the TED one, but at the time Wired one. He was publishing the long tail, and I asked him if Beethoven was born, how would we recognize him as a universal, non-measurable genius of music? Where would it go in the long tail? I mean, there is something that is not measurable in arts, or in success, and in judgment. And is that something related to some sort of intuition / biases? What do you think?
Oh, that's a beautiful topic. How much time do you have? Because let's talk about geniuses. First of all,
7 seconds.
Geniuses tend to be born around big cities at the right time, right? Around the big German cities in the 18th century, around Rome in the 16th, and Florence around the 16th, 17th century, right? And around New York City today, and Boston and so on. So genius is a truly subjective assessment of somebody's performance that we as a society award, that of course it requires performance, but is not enough to have performance. And often when you look actually carefully at the genius label, there is a story behind that, and it often has to do more with the human story than has to do with the true performance itself. So in that respect, actually, the genius label is probably the best example of what I talked about, is that really success is a collective measure, right? And a collective label, and the ultimate illustration of that is really kind of labeling someone as a genius. It's valuable as a marketing insight, but there's a correlation between performance and genius status, in the sense that we rarely label anyone genius if he or she has not achieved something remarkable, but at the same time, there are many individuals who are well documented to be just as remarkable as those who were assigned genius, and they happen to be war women, so we never call them a genius.
Thank you very much. Davide, Consiglio, would you like to ask some questions to our scientists?
Thank you, Luca. Yes, a couple of questions from my side. One is specifically for László. So for context, this morning, we had a great workshop with László, where he shared with a group of data scientists and friends, about 50 people in the company. It's already about 50 people in the company, data scientists and the friends. His theory about networks. And I want to pick up on something you said to really make specific for the people listening how concrete your network theory is, which is the relationship you described about networks and organizational charts. And this is a large corporate, as you know, no introduction needed. And can you elaborate a bit on how the organizational charts should facilitate the network building, and how, in fact, many times it hinders the network building?
Sure. So absolutely. So obviously this is better told with slides, but let's try without that. One of the things we do, and we actually being a company that I funded in Hungary, is that we map out organizational networks. That is like who is really interacting with who in the company, who is talking to whom, do you turn for advice in a case of organizational matters and so on. And when we look at that, we find that there are a couple of natural hubs in the organization. In any organization, they do emerge. These hubs are common in networks, but they emerge in organizational networks as well. And of course, the beauty of the story is that these hubs rarely or almost never correspond to the okay, that these hubs rarely or almost never actually correspond to highly ranked individual within the company. So there's no correlation between your management rank and your hub status. And actually the example that I like to show is that the most connected individual is that the one who everybody turns to for questions about organizational matters is somebody who's coming from the bottom of the organization, is a very talkative person who is in charge of health and safety. He talks to anyone. He has access to all the information. There's only one group of people he doesn't talk to, which is the management, right? And what I think it's, for me, is an interesting takeaway from that is that we're always looking at an organization from the official chart perspective, but the success of the organization is as much determined by the relationship between the people, because in the 21st century, the value of a company is rarely the technology. Technology can be reproduced and kind of copied by others. It's really the people who make that organization alive, and the people who are able to take this technology out of the company context and reach it and provide it to the market in general, to individuals. This know-how really, and this ability depends on how the company is organized, who's talking with whom, what units are communicating and what don't. And right now we really don't have tools, or don't use tools in management to really X-ray the company from that perspective. We assume is that what the CEO puts in place is that's what happens. And when we actually X-ray the companies through the real social network, there's always surprises of finding units that don't work together, finding individuals that are the true value of the company. So network science offers a perspective to really, like a dashboard, to look inside an organization and say, who are the people without whom this company could not work? We know the CEO is important, but it's also expendable, right? We change CEOs all the time. But who are the 10, 20, 200 people who are not expendable? Because if you take out the company falls apart.
Thank you, Laszlo. And the second question is general for both of you. Is we touched upon a lot of it today. Is how are you seeing corporates, based on your experience, in Europe and also in the United States, coping with GDPR in Europe and with regulation anyway in the United States? And is it hindering the intellectual capital development, or is intellectual capital funding alternative ways to cope and to still push the needle of research and applications?
Shall I take this? Yeah. So let me tell it straight. I really believe that GDPR is a very positive challenge and a positive push for especially European companies, corporates. But I mean,
record.
I really believe so, because it sets a standard where it recognizes the height of the challenge. We are making a digital revolution by leveraging on people's data. Right? Because this is the real fuel of the economy now. The data produced by us every day, continuously. This has to be handled with care. And the corporates that will be somehow more creative and innovative in finding smart ways of extracting values from this information in an ethical, strongly ethical, we will actually have a competitive advantage in a few years from now. This should be really taken seriously as a big opportunities. And let me tell it straight, also a very good opportunity for Europe to catch up with the American giants, the American corporations, that actually had so far really not a responsible innovation approach, a huge innovation approach. Something that can be tried out, let's try it out. There was a very beautiful title in a New York articles about a couple of months ago about how US universities are somehow striving to get teachers for digital ethics. And in every computer science department, they are trying to recruit people to teach digital ethics. And it turns out to be difficult, because it's not easy to find this kind of skills. Now, the title of the thing, the subtitles of the article was, "The medical sciences ethics do not harm. Silicon Valley as an ethos. Let's try it out, and then we ask for forgiveness later." No, which is somehow the typical brutal innovation approach that can bring to things like Cambridge Analytica, all this. somehow predictable disasters that actually are not avoided. And I think that for not only for the privacy part, which is large and innovative, but also for the most ethically grounding and challenging part of the regulation, the Article 22nd and the right of explanation and so on and so forth. There is a lot of new challenges that need to be taken very seriously and with a lot of imagination from corporations. And the idea, I think, is very straight and simple. Make people, individual customers, individual users, much more able to extract value from their own information. Don't use the digital tracks of car insured only for managing risk from a corporate point of view. Try to learn to teach people to be to have a less risky behavior, improve their driving experience, improve their safety. And then you will have actually better customer, better revenue, and much happier customers. I think this kind of approach, be people more capable of not simply signing pieces of paper where deliver any right to the corporation, but delivering new levels of autonomy and awareness. It's difficult to do, but it can be done. It can be very successful.
Thank you, Dino.
Thank you. You want to comment also? No.